Welcome back. Starting this step, let's look at virtual machine scale sets. How do you simplify the creation and management of multiple virtual machines? That's where we would go for virtual machine scale sets. This allows you to create and manage a group of Azure virtual machines. This provides high availability for your applications. In the previous step, we saw that if I create multiple VMs, I get higher availability. If I create multiple VMs across multiple availability zones, I get even higher availability. Virtual machine scale sets also allows you to add a load balancer. So if you have multiple Azure VMs, if you have your application deployed to them, you want to be able to load balance between those instances. Virtual machine scale sets also helps you to create a load balancer. It also helps you to distribute VM instances across multiple availability zones. As we discussed earlier, not all regions have multiple availability zones. Wherever you have multiple availability zones, you can use a scale set to distribute your VM instances across multiple availability zones. Virtual machine scale sets also supports manual scaling and auto scaling. Let's say I have 5 instances right now. I can increase it to 10, 15. I can do that manually. The other option I also have is auto scaling. Based on the number of requests which are coming in, I can increase the number of instances automatically. You can create up to 1,000 virtual machine instances in a single scale set. If you go ahead and search for virtual machine scale sets. So if you search for virtual machine scale sets, you'll be able to pick it up. Until now, we've been playing with virtual machines. Right now, we would want to create a scale set. So let's go ahead and select that. So scale sets, and this is where we would want to add a new scale set. So Azure Virtual Machine Scale Sets let you create and manage a group of load balanced VMs. The number of VM instances can automatically increase or decrease in response to demand or a defined schedule. This provides high availability to your applications. So a virtual machine scale set makes it very, very easy to manage, configure, and update a large number of virtual machines. What we'll do is we'll choose the same resource group that we have been using until now, compute resource group. I want to give it a name of VM scale set 1. Let's choose the default region and the availability zones. You can also choose specifically which availability zones you'd want to deploy your applications to. What I would do is I would choose all the 3 zones. If you scroll down, you can choose the image and you can also choose the size. And you can also choose the SSH key. What I would do is to reuse the same thing that we created earlier. So use existing key stored in Azure, and I would choose my first VM key. So this is the same configuration that we have been doing until now, except for the fact that we chose the region and the availability zones. I'll click next to disks. The specific thing I'm really interested in is networking. So let's click next to networking. There are 2 very important things that we would want to configure in networking. One is the network interface. Whenever we are creating a scale set, by default, it would only create a private IP address for the virtual machines. What we would want to do is to create a public IP address. How do we do that? The way we can do that is by going and clicking in this pencil icon in here. So you can click that and I can say I'd want a public inbound port. And I would say allow selected ports, and I would say I would want to allow HTTP traffic, and I would also want to allow SSH into these virtual machines. The machines that we are creating are test demo machines, so it should not be a problem to allow SSH access into them. And I will also enable public IP address for this. So these 2 are very important settings that you need to enable. So on the virtual machines, what we are doing is we are enabling inbound traffic and we are enabling the creation of public IP address. And I would say OK. So on the network interface, we enabled public IP addresses and we also enabled HTTP traffic and SSH traffic into it. In addition, what I also want to do is to load balance between the VM instances. I'll go ahead and configure a load balancer. So use load balancer and we'll create a new load balancer. So let's choose the Azure load balancer and let's take the defaults with all the settings. On the next page, you can configure scaling. You can either go for manual scaling or custom scaling. Manual scaling is you decide how many instances to run. 2 instances, 10 instances, 20 instances. If you go to custom, you can also configure how you'd want to do the auto scaling. You can say I would want to do auto scaling based on the CPU load. So if the CPU load is greater than 75%, I would want to add a new instance in. So there are a lot of other metrics that you can configure in here. So based on those metrics, you can auto scale the number of instances. Based on the load which is coming in, you can increase or decrease the number of instances. For now, I would choose manual, and let's have the initial instance count as 2. From scaling, let's go to advanced. In advanced, you can configure how many fault domains you want, and also you can configure cloud init. I'd want to run these set of commands. So let's go ahead and use them and paste them in here. So sudo su apt-get -5 update install nginx, and I'll remove the next 2 ones. This is exactly the same things that we have configured for the second VM. So sudo su apt-get y update, apt-get -y install nginx, and welcome to 28 minutes hostname. So this looks good. Let's go ahead and say review and create. Azure is running its final validation. Let's wait for it to complete. Cool, the validation has passed. So we have chosen the default region, which is East US. We have chosen 3 availability zones, and we want 2 instances to be running. We have enabled load balancing. We have also enabled public IP addresses, and we also have cloud init configured. All these things look good. So let's go ahead and say create. The deployment is right now in progress. It would take a few minutes for the deployment to complete. I'll see you in the next step.